Hello, Enlightium Academy family. Today we are going to be taking a look at MLA formatting. We'll go over the basics of when, why, and how to do MLA formatting. Feel free to take notes or to bookmark this resource, as you will be using this format for a majority of the classes where you have to submit written assignments. This obviously means any English classes you take, but will also include other core classes like history and Bible. Here's our agenda. We will cover what citations are, when you need to use them, the basic elements of a citation, how to cite common resources like books and online sources, how to cite an initial lesson, where to find the information you need to cite, how to do in-text and parenthetical citations, and some places you can go to find more details about how to cite sources. It's a lot, I know, but we'll get through it all. First, let's get the obvious question out of the way. What even is a citation? A citation is a way to give credit to another author or speaker whose idea you used. If another author or speaker makes a claim or has an idea that you would find helpful to use in your own work, you can use it as long as you correctly cite them. That is, you let anyone reading or listening to your work know where you got that information. That way, they don't just assume that those ideas are yours. Citations are a way to give credit where credit is due. So, how do you know when you need to cite someone else's work? I'm glad you asked. Here are a few instances. You need to cite whenever you are directly quoting from someone. Whenever you use their exact words, you need to make that clear. Don't forget to use quotation marks as well. You also need to cite when you paraphrase someone. Let's say you like what they're saying, but you need to reword it slightly to make it fit within your work. That's called paraphrasing. When you do that, you are still technically using someone else's ideas, so you need to let your audience know where you got it from. You don't have to use quotation marks when you paraphrase, but you do need to use a parenthetical citation. We'll get to that a little bit later. You also need to cite someone when you are summarizing or referencing another's ideas. These last three can be a bit confusing, so let's look at an example. Here we have a few sentences that might appear in a paper on psychology. Notice how there are no direct quotations here or paraphrases from any specific source. Here the author is just summarizing and referencing a well-known theory in psychology. Since this is a very specific idea that can be credited mostly to one person, Jacques Lacan, it's important to give him recognition when referring to it. I did that here by including a parenthetical citation with his name. Again, we will get to parenthetical citations in just a little bit. Now that you know when to cite, let's get into the how. Every works cited entry will have the same basic elements. First, you will include an author. The author is the person or persons who created the source you are using, whether it's a book, video, or website. Next, you will include the title of the source. This is the name of the specific work that you read and that you're citing from. Third, use the title of the container if one is present. If you are using a shorter source like a news article or a YouTube video, the title of the container would be the title of the longer work that your source can be found in, such as the website your article was found on. Some sources also have a version. This means that there is more than one copy of your source, and each one may have variations. If your source has a version, edition, or number, you will include that in your citation as well. One example of a source that may have a version is a magazine or newspaper. Lastly, you will need to include the publisher and the date of publication. The publisher is the person or organization who published the work. The date of publication is when the source was published. Some works have more than one title. It's important to know the difference between these types of titles and how they are formatted. The formatting of a title depends on how long the source is. If a source is short, such as a short story, a news article, or a song, the title should appear in quotation marks. For instance, If you found a recipe online titled How to Bake Cookies, this title would appear in quotation marks. If a source is long or more than 30,000 words, like a book, a play, or a multi-volume work like encyclopedias or magazines, the title should appear in italics. For example, if you are citing the classic novel Frankenstein, it should appear in italics. The last type of title is the title of a container, which is the larger source, such as a website, a whole magazine, or a multi-volume work that your short source is found inside. For instance, if you found an article about World War II on history.com, the title of the container would be history.com because that's the larger website your article is found. Okay, now we're going to get into the detailed work of MLA formatting. Take a look at the specific components of a works cited entry for a printed source. To review, a printed source is any source that is on physical paper, such as a book, a newspaper, or a magazine. The first part of any works cited entry is the author. The author's name should appear last name first, comma, first name, comma, middle initial, period. If there is no middle initial, simply leave this out. Next, you will include the title of your source. If your work is short, like a news article, the title will appear in quotation marks. If the source is long, like a book, the title will be italicized. Remember, we went over this in the previous slide. The third component you will need is the publisher, or the person who put the source out there. Lastly, conclude with the date the source was published. It's important to remember that the punctuation in a works cited entry matters, just like it matters in a sentence. Just like in your sentences, it helps separate or group certain information. Pay careful attention to where the periods and commas are placed. At this point, you may be thinking, great, now I know how to cite a print source. But where do I find all those details like publisher and publication date? Well, this is an example of the title and copyright pages from a book. These are located in the very beginning of books before the main content starts. On these pages, you will find all the information you need to cite your source correctly, including the following. Author of the work, shown in the blue box. The title of the work, shown in the green box. The publisher or the publication date of the work, shown in the orange box, and the publisher of the work, shown in the purple box. Using the information we found on the previous slide, we can create a complete works cited entry for this book. First, we will add the author's name. It should appear new tall, comma, A period D period. As in this example, some authors will also abbreviate their first name in addition to their middle initial. Next, we will include the title of the work. Since this is a citation for a printed book, which is a longer source, the title should be italicized. Watch out for words like a, the, and of in your titles. Unless these words appear in the beginning of the title, they don't need to be capitalized. The third component is the publisher, followed by a comma. Here, the publisher is Vail Bailu Press. Lastly, we will add the year that this source was published and finish our citation with a period. The publication year is usually the same as the copyright date, so look for that word. Remember to add a hanging indent if your citation is longer than one line. If a book is really popular and it's been around for a long time, like To Kill a Mockingbird, there will often be multiple versions of it. Make sure you cite the specific version you're using, since page numbers and other small details may change depending on the version. Now let's take a look at the components of a works cited entry for an online source. This is the one you will likely use the most. This works cited entry will be very similar to the one for a print source. However, there are two additional pieces of information. Like a print source, you will still include the author's name, the title of the work, the publisher, and the date of publication. However, for an online source, you would also include the link to the specific page or website you are citing and the day that you accessed the source. For the access date, you would write the word accessed with a capital A, followed by the day, the abbreviated name of the month, and the year. It is common for online sources to have two titles. For instance, the name of the specific page you looked at would appear in quotation marks. However, the website where you found the source is the title of the container. In the example provided, the name of the specific page is Octopus. You can also consider that the name of the article. This title would appear first in quotation marks. Then we would list the name of the website itself as the title of the container. In the example above, that is National Geographic Kids. Notice how we also have National Geographic without the italics listed as the publisher. On this slide, we'll walk through where to find information to help you cite a website. First, look for the author. It's typically written underneath the title of a source, if there is one. Sometimes there isn't an author listed. If not, you will leave this out of your final entry. Some websites that are frequently used in education, such as history.com in the example above, will include a tab or section with the citation information you need. Unlike in this example, it's important to note that sometimes the publisher and the title of the container are the same. In this case, you would only list the name once. For instance, if this source did not list a separate publisher, history.com would be both the longer work title and the publisher. Therefore, it would only appear once in your final works cited entry. Lastly, not all websites clearly identify the date of publication at the top of the article. However, you can often find the publication date in the copyright information at the bottom of the page. One other quick thing to note is that websites that are often used for education or often used as references in other people's works will sort of make this step a little easier for you. Notice here in the sort of middle right, we have a cite button on the website. If you click that, or you see that on any other website and click it, it will usually pop up all the information for you on a side panel. Sometimes it will even put everything in the correct format for you, but always double check it to make sure it's correct. Based on the information we gathered on the previous slide, we can fill out the formula provided for how to create a works cited entry for a website. Just like any other works cited entry, we put the author first if one is present. In this case, the author is simply listed as history.com staff, so we'll put that. Next, we add the title of the work in quotation marks. The container that our article is found in is history.com, followed by the publication date. Remember that the main difference between a citation for a printed source versus an electronic source is the specific URL for the source you used, followed by a period. Lastly, add the date you accessed it. So do your best to find all the information you can to accurately cite a source. Sometimes, though, things will just be missing. If you can't find a particular piece of information, just skip it, leave it out. This will happen more often with online sources than print sources. Sometimes you may find that you want or need to cite directly from a lesson in Ignitia. Since Ignitia is a private, closed source, you won't find any information about how to cite it online. So we've created a method for you. Creating a works cited entry for an Ignitia lesson begins similarly to other sources. If you are citing content in general, like a quote from your science lesson on volcanoes, you would start with the title of the assignment in quotation marks, then include the name of the course, a colon, and the name of the unit. The publisher is AOP Ignitia, and the year of publication would be 2015. Typically, with an online source, you would include the link. However, since Ignitia is a closed system, that means other people can't access it. They wouldn't be able to follow a link even if you provided one. Instead of the link, put the word web after the publication information. Lastly, include the access date just like you would for any other online source. This formula would look a little different if you want to use content that you found in Ignitia but was written by someone else. For example, let's say you want to use the short story The Lady or the Tiger. Well, that was written by Frank R. Stockton. Begin your works cited entry with the author's name, Frank R. Stockton, followed by the title of the work. After this, your entry should match the entry for any other Ignitia content that was described earlier. Now that you've got the basics for how to cite print and online sources, let's briefly look at how you will put them all together on your Works Cited page. A Works Cited page has specific formatting just like the rest of your paper. First of all, Works Cited entries are in alphabetical order, or put in the order of the English alphabet. This is done using the author's last names, since that is the first thing to appear in your entries. When no author is present, it is alphabetized using the title of the source. In the example provided on this slide, there is no author for the source, so it is listed starting with the title. You would alphabetize it by the letter O. A works cited entry also has hanging indents. This means that the lines after the first one are indented, as shown in the example works cited entry here. This is an example of how a complete works cited page might look. Notice that we have a mix of sources that have no authors and ones that do. Regardless of whether there is an author, you will still alphabetize the entries by first letter. Also notice the hanging indent. All right, we're going to switch focus a little bit and talk about in-text citations. You need both in-text citations and a works cited page for your source to be cited correctly. So what is an in-text citation? I'm glad you asked. An in-text citation is a way of giving your sources credit in your paper rather than just at the very end of it. It includes the author's last name and the page number that the information was found on if page numbers are available. A lot of times with online sources, you won't get page numbers. The purpose of an in-text citation is to point your reader to the more specific information found on your works cited page. They should appear before the final punctuation of the sentence. Notice how the in-text citation in the example provided appears immediately after the direct quote, but before the period at the end of the sentence. We tend to use in-text citations in three major instances. First of all, we use them after a direct quote. In the example provided, the in-text citation appears at the very end of the quote directly after "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" We also use in-text citations after paraphrases. To review, a paraphrase occurs when you express the main idea of another's work using different or similar words. In other words, if you liked the quote but changed it a little to be in your own words, this is a paraphrase and still needs an in-text citation. Lastly, we use in-text citations anytime we got our ideas from a source. A good rule to follow is this. If you did not know the information before doing research, cite it. It's important to know that in-text citations don't always look the same. As you have already learned, some sources have several authors, while others have no clear author at all. This also affects the way we write in-text citations for that source. The first exception is when a source has two authors rather than one. In this case, we would list both of the author's last names in parentheses as shown in the first example. Another time in-text citations look different is when they have 3 or more authors. Yes, some sources can have 3 or more authors. In this case, we would list the first author's last name followed by the phrase et al. E-T-A-L period. Et al is like a fancy word. It's Latin, and that means and everybody else. You may also find sources without a clear author at all. In this case, you will use the title in quotation marks. If the title is like super long, you may shorten it to a few words. Lastly, not all sources have page numbers. Again, most online sources won't have page numbers. If that's the case, then just leave it out. At Enlightium, you will often be asked to use the Bible as a source. Here's how you would cite it. If you're using a physical copy of the Bible, you will start with the Holy Bible as the title, then the version of the Bible you're using. We all know that the Bible is the inspired word of God, but God is not the author, so don't list him as one. If you're using an online version of the Bible, such as Bible Gateway or BibleStudy.com, you'll start your citation with the passage you're quoting. The rest of the citation will follow the guidelines for quoting online sources. That includes the URL and the access date. Your in-text citation of the Bible, you will cite the book, chapter, and verse, followed by the version of the Bible you're using. If you need more help with citations, here are a few very good resources. Feel free to jot them down or take a screenshot of the web addresses. First is the University of North Carolina's MLA Source Guide. It covers all the basics and it's pretty easy to navigate. Next, we have Purdue OWL. It's the most comprehensive MLA guide you will probably find online. It has lots of great examples of how to cite just about any source you can possibly think of, from books to blogs. It is also a massive site that takes a bit of time to figure out. When you get some free time, you might want to just go in there and play around a bit. You can bookmark the links for sources that you think you might use a lot. I will say, though, that this site also has a ton of ads, so be careful where you click. So I know this was a bit long, but it is chock full of useful information that will carry you through a lot of your classes, both here and beyond. Your teachers will also provide you with extra resources to help you with MLA formatting. And as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.